Night shift hearts. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital flickered at 2:47 a.m. when Dr. Maya Chen collapsed against the supply room door, her surgical mask soaked, with tears she couldn't afford to shed in front of her colleagues. She had just lost a patient, a 7-year-old girl with eyes that reminded her of her younger sister, and the weight of that small, still body on the operating table had shattered something inside her that all her years of medical school had tried to forge into steel. Maya had chosen surgery because she believed she could save everyone. But tonight the universe had reminded her that some battles couldn't be won with scalpels and sutures. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal shelving, trying to remember how to breathe, when the door opened behind her and a voice, softer than anything she'd heard in this sterile building, asked if she was okay. Maya didn't turn around because she knew that voice belonged to Rebecca Torres, the night shift nurse whose compassionate brown eyes had been haunting her thoughts for 6 months, and she couldn't bear to let Rebecca see her like this, broken and human and nothing like the confident surgeon everyone believed her to be. Rebecca had noticed Dr. Chen the first night she'd transferred to the surgical ward, not because of the doctor's impressive reputation or her focused intensity during procedures, but because of the way Maya's hands trembled slightly every time she scrubbed out, after a difficult surgery, as if she were washing away more than just antiseptic soap. In their hospital's rigid hierarchy, doctors and nurses existed in different orbits, rarely colliding beyond professional necessity. But Rebecca had always been drawn to the people who carried their wounds quietly, and she recognized that particular kind of silent suffering in Maya's midnight blue eyes. Over months of late shifts, Rebecca had learned Maya's patterns, how she skipped meals when cases went badly, how she double-checked every monitor and chart 3 times before leaving a patient's bedside, how she stood alone in the observation room after everyone else had gone home, staring at empty operating theaters as if replaying every decision in her mind. Tonight, finding Maya in the supply room with her shoulders shaking and her carefully constructed armor finally cracked open, Rebecca didn't hesitate. She stepped inside, closed the door behind them, and did something that went against every professional boundary she'd been taught to maintain. She wrapped her arms around Maya and held her while she broke. Maya should have stepped away, should have apologized and straightened her coat and rebuilt the walls that kept her safe from feeling too much in a profession that demanded clinical detachment. Instead, she turned into Rebecca's embrace and let herself fall apart against this woman, who smelled like lavender hand cream and kindness, who held her without asking questions or offering empty platitudes about how it wasn't her fault or how she'd done everything she could. Rebecca simply anchored her in the storm, one hand pressed between Maya's shoulder blades and the other, cradling the back of her head. And for the first time since Maya had put on a white coat, she felt like someone saw her as more than just a pair of skilled hands in an operating room. They stood like that for what might have been minutes or hours. Time moved differently in hospitals at night until Maya's breathing steadied and she finally lifted her head to find Rebecca watching her with such tender understanding that it hurt. Worse than the grief, Maya whispered, "Thank you." And Rebecca whispered, "You don't have to carry it all alone." And something fundamental shifted between them in that moment. Something that couldn't be undone or explained away by adrenaline or professional courtesy. The hospital became their secret world after that night. A place where their carefully casual interactions in front of colleagues hid the way their hands lingered when passing charts, the way their eyes found each other across crowded hallways, the way they began timing their breaks to coincide in the empty cafeteria at 4 in the morning, when the rest of the city slept. Rebecca would bring 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee, and Maya would share whatever she'd stress-baked the night before, lemon bars or chocolate chip cookies that she claimed helped her think but really just gave her something to do with her anxious hands. They talked about everything except what was growing between them, that terrifying and exhilarating thing that made Maya's heart race faster than any emergency surgery and kept Rebecca lying awake during her days off, wondering if she was imagining the electricity that sparked every time their fingers accidentally touched. Maya learned that Rebecca had become a nurse because her mother had died slowly in a hospital where no one had time to hold her hand. that she read poetry to patients who couldn't sleep, that she'd been engaged, once to a man who couldn't understand why she kept choosing night shifts and broken people over a normal life. Rebecca learned that Maya had a daughter who lived with her ex-husband, that she played Chopin on her apartment's piano when she needed to feel something other than fear, that she'd known she was attracted to women since medical school but had buried that truth under the weight of her family's expectations and her own ambition. Their first kiss happened in the most unromantic place imaginable, the hospital parking garage at dawn, both of them exhausted after a 36-hour shift that had claimed 3 lives and saved 4 others standing beside Maya's car because neither of them could quite bring themselves to leave yet. Rebecca had said something about the sunrise being beautiful through the concrete pillars, and Maya had laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks. And before she could think about all the reasons this was complicated and dangerous and potentially career-ending, she was cupping Rebecca's face in her still trembling surgeon's hands and kissing her with all the desperate tenderness she'd been suppressing for months. Rebecca kissed her back like she was something precious and breakable and worth the risk. And when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and smiling and terrified in the best possible way. Maya said they should probably talk about this, and Rebecca said they probably should. But instead they just stood there holding each other, while the hospital woke up around them and the morning shift arrived and their impossible love story began in earnest. The reality of their relationship was harder than the fantasy had been, complicated by hospital policies about fraternization, by Maya's custody arrangements and her ex-husband's conservative views, by Rebecca's Catholic family who barely spoke to her anymore after she came out at 25, by the exhausting choreography of keeping their relationship hidden from colleagues who would have opinions and judgments about appropriate boundaries between doctors and nurses. They stole moments in supply closets and empty patient rooms, planned their rare days off together with military precision, learned to communicate in glances across operating tables and coded text messages during shifts. Maya introduced Rebecca to her daughter Emma as her friend first, then as someone special, terrified that her 8-year-old would reject this new reality, or that her ex-husband would use it as ammunition in court. But Emma, with the uncomplicated wisdom of children, simply asked if Rebecca made her mommy happy. And when Maya said yes with tears in her eyes, Emma hugged Rebecca and asked if she could braid her hair sometime. Rebecca's family was less accepting. Her father stopped taking her calls. Her mother prayed loudly for her soul at Sunday dinners. Rebecca no longer attended, but her younger brother sent a text saying he was proud of her for choosing happiness. And sometimes that single message was enough to get her through the hard days. The hospital became both sanctuary and prison, the place where they'd found each other, but also where they had to pretend they were nothing more than cordial colleagues. Maya hated watching other doctors flirt with Rebecca in the break room, hated the way Dr. Peterson from orthopedics leaned too close when asking her to assist with cases, hated having to swallow her jealousy and possessiveness because they'd agreed to keep things professional within the hospital walls. Rebecca struggled with the power dynamic that everyone else saw and judged. The whispers about whether she'd gotten easier assignments because of her relationship with an attending surgeon, the way some nurses treated her differently once rumors started, circulating despite their discretion. They fought about it sometimes, about whether they should just come out publicly and face whatever consequences came, about whether hiding was the same as being ashamed, about whose career would suffer more if their relationship became official hospital gossip. Maya worried about Rebecca's safety in a profession where women who loved women still faced discrimination and harassment, about how her own reputation as a surgeon might be reduced to who she was sleeping with rather than how many lives she'd saved. Rebecca worried that Maya would eventually decide the complication wasn't worth it, that she would choose the easier path of dating someone outside the hospital who didn't challenge every professional boundary she'd built her career on. Everything changed the night they worked together on a mass casualty event, a bus accident that brought 17 patients to their emergency department within 20 minutes, turning their orderly hospital into chaos, and blood and impossible. Choices about who to save first. Maya was in her element, directing residents and making split-second decisions, her hands steady and her voice calm despite the carnage. But she kept glancing toward Rebecca, who was triaging patients with quiet efficiency, her scrubs already soaked through with someone else's blood. They worked separately for hours. Maya in operating room 2, trying to repair a teenage boy's lacerated liver while Rebecca managed the controlled pandemonium of the ER, and it wasn't until almost dawn when the last patient was stabilized that Maya found Rebecca sitting alone in the stairwell, staring at her shaking hands. Maya sat down beside her without a word, and Rebecca said she'd held a woman's hand while she died, had promised her that her children would be okay even though she had no way of knowing if that was true, had lied with kindness because sometimes that's all they could offer. Maya took Rebecca's blood-stained hands in her own and said that's what made her an incredible nurse, that capacity for compassion even in horror. And Rebecca looked at her and said she couldn't do this job without knowing Maya was somewhere in the same building, that loving her had made every shift bearable and every loss less lonely. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever loved someone against the odds or found connection in unexpected places, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us share more stories about love in all its forms, about people who choose each other despite the complications, about the quiet courage it takes to build a life with someone when the world isn't always ready to understand. And if you've ever worked a night shift, if you know what it's like to save lives in fluorescent lit hallways while your own life waits in the shadows, drop a comment below sharing your story. We read every single one, and your words remind us why these stories matter, why representation matters, why love in all its beautiful complexity deserves to be celebrated and seen. Maya and Rebecca eventually stopped hiding, not with a dramatic announcement, but with small, deliberate acts of visibility. Maya bringing Rebecca coffee in front of the attending physicians, Rebecca resting her hand on Maya's shoulder during a particularly difficult case, both of them leaving the hospital together at shift change, without pretending they were headed in different directions. Some colleagues were supportive, others were coldly professional, a few were openly hostile, but Maya and Rebecca had stopped caring about the opinions of people who couldn't understand that love was love regardless of where you found it or who you found it with. Maya's ex-husband initially threatened to pursue full custody, calling her lifestyle inappropriate for raising their daughter. But Emma herself testified to the court-appointed guardian about how happy her mommy was now, how Rebecca taught her to braid hair and didn't try to replace her daddy but just added more love to their family. Rebecca's mother eventually called, didn't apologize but asked if she could meet Maya, which felt like forgiveness even if the words were never spoken. They moved in together after a year, bought a small house with a garden where Emma could play on the weekends. She stayed with them, adopted a 3-legged cat from the shelter who had been deemed unadoptable because of her disability but who purred louder than any perfect animal ever could. Maya taught Rebecca to play simple songs on the piano, and Rebecca taught Maya that not every moment had to be productive or meaningful, that sometimes the best medicine was sitting on the back porch at sunrise after a long shift with coffee and comfortable silence. They still worked night shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, still saved lives and lost patients and carried the weight of their profession home in their bones, but now they carried it together, and that made all the difference. Maya learned that being vulnerable wasn't weakness but rather the bravest thing she could do, that letting someone see her broken parts didn't diminish her strength as a surgeon but actually made her more human, more whole. Rebecca learned that love didn't always look like the fairy tales she'd grown up reading, that sometimes the most romantic gesture was someone understanding your silence or holding you while you grieved or simply showing up every single day, despite the complications. Before we close this story, we want to hear from you. If you believe in love that defies expectations, if you've ever been a night shift worker in any profession, or if this story reminded you of your own journey to find authentic happiness, please leave a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you. Share your own experiences, or just let us know you were here. Your words create community, And in that community, we all feel a little less alone. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, with sunlight streaming through the hospital windows, and the night shift finally ending, Maya walked past the supply room where Rebecca had first held her while she broke, and she smiled at the memory of who she'd been then. So afraid of being seen, so convinced that strength meant standing alone. Rebecca appeared beside her, still in her scrubs, her hair escaping its bun in that way that Maya had learned meant it had been a particularly difficult shift, and asked if she was ready to go home. Maya took her hand right there in the hallway, in front of Dr. Peterson and the morning nurses and anyone else who wanted to watch, and said, "Yes, I'm ready," and together they walked out into the daylight. Two women who had found each other in the darkness and decided that their love story was worth every complication, every judgment, every obstacle, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is love someone openly and completely, even when the world tells you it's too complicated, too risky, too different from the life you were supposed to want. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely places, in hospitals at 3 in the morning, between a nurse and a doctor, between two hearts that beat in synchrony despite all the reasons they shouldn't, between two souls who saw each other in the fluorescent lit darkness and said, "Yes, you always you."